Pedro, the track was massive in its day. It got changed quite a few times. It was like 640 yards when we were around, and then it got changed a little bit. Turn 4, hallowed ground for a lot of competitors.
Absolutely. I mean, that's the money corner, isn't it? We come out of the turn 4 and cross the finish line. There's been some memorable wins and losses made out of turn 4.
Absolutely. Checkers or wreckers, some of them.
That's it, yep.
Now, when they changed the track, Pedro, we're going to look at some of the parts where the pits changed back then. They changed the track in about 1993.
Yes. They redeveloped the showground, especially this end of the showground. From the pits we used to have, we were squeezed in with hundreds of competitors every night, and they made it so there was a lot more room, but it certainly changed the atmosphere of the track and the pit area. But here we are again today. It's overgrown and completely different to what we remember.
Absolutely.
We are on Pitts Bend. Where I'm standing is pretty close to where the pits used to be. It was a dirt pit area. Most of the people that were in the pits, competitors and crew, could stand right on the edge of the fence and watch the racing. It's the area where Sharon Marriott and Ron Cricky came together. Ron made a beeline through the top of the in-gate, landed upside down in the pits, scared the hell out of a lot of people. Thankfully, there was only one reasonably serious injury, and people were very lucky that night to get away with that incident. The pits now is the redeveloped area. We have up the top there the Charles Maglow Pavilion, which was built in place of the old pits. And we used to enter under there. There's a concrete floor. It made a nice area for the pits, but as I said before, it was a big change to the actual atmosphere of the pit area.
Well, good day everyone and welcome to Slightly Sideways, a very special edition. We have a very special guest today and not normally who we'd have on, which we're really excited about, and Pedro is with me again. And Pedro, we've been excited about this one for about a week and a half.
We have. Real nostalgic day today. We've got a second guest as well that we'll talk about later, but I have next to me a lady who has an experience from Claremont Speedway from many, many decades ago, and she lived in the area. She works down here at the Claremont Museum, and I'd like to welcome Ethel Lucas.
Thank you.
Welcome, Ethel. We met probably 10 or 15 years ago when I came down to the museum, and you were with your sister. And we sat together and we discussed some of the early days of Claremont. And I can distinctly remember feeling, wonderful feelings about what it would be like to be back in those days. And I won't ask your age, but I know you were a young girl back then, and you were involved with the Speedway. You could hear the Speedway, you could smell the Speedway. So we'd like to have a chat with you about it today. And just whatever your memories are, we'd like to hear.
Well, Friday night was Speedway night. That was from the last Friday of show week to the Friday before Good Friday every year.
Every year.
There'd been a family interest, and I'd always heard my parents talk of Sig Slam and Cinders tracks even before Claremont, apparently White City somewhere down by Gloucester Park or down that way.
Okay.
And also I know that when there'd been English test teams over, the Gascoignes, they were involved in motor sport and so on, had brought members of the team to our place because we had a great abundance of grapes on big trellises, which fascinated the English riders. But I was still a primary school girl when I started at the Speedway, and for attending every Monday morning, the teacher at Greyland School where I went asked every student who had been to the Speedway on Friday night to stand, and we got a lecture. It wasn't really the place for us to be.
Is that right? You almost got told off to go to the
I took no notice whatsoever.
Good on you.
There were two girls in the class who went regularly.
Wow.
A number of the boys did occasionally, but we were regular Speedway fans. So much so, I was still a Speedway fan when it came to, a lot of people will probably remember the public examination, the junior examination. It was the first major thing the kids sat.
Yep.
But there was an international team here that week, but the week before, and there were two Speedway nights. I went to both of them. Yeah.
That's fantastic.
And initially, for many years, we sat on Pitts Bend. In fact, we sat right in front of the pits because they didn't extend down to the fence at that stage, and there were about 3 rows of seats, well, planks on poles, and then a slight slope up, and the pits were up behind us.
Okay.
So, you heard all the tuning up and work going on there.
Well, I never knew that.
And saw them there. Later on, we went round to Fowl House Corner because you used to be able to take a car in, and if it was likely to rain, not enough to stop the Speedway, but if you got a few showers, you could hop in your car. And if you look carefully at the trees around there on the road that goes around there, none of them have limbs very low because they were quite young and quite easy to do a bit of pruning of things that got in the way.
Yeah.
But the first competitors that I remember much was in the solos, Jack Sharp, who I think was the last to trail his foot, and Wally Higgs, who went to England and came back with his revolutionary foot forward. style.
Yep.
Mick Janef, heavens knows what he did with his legs. They were so long, he seemed to stand.
Yeah, he was
all
really
the
tall
time.
for a solo rider, wasn't he?
Little Titch Madden and Crash Edwards, who had a farm somewhere, and he used to pull into the pits with his old farm truck, sort of thing. And his bike would come off the back. Sidecars, Normie Kestel, who I unfortunately think died on the highway. Not at the
Stirling
Speedway,
Highway?
Stirling Highway.
Yeah.
Trolley bus poles, they were
That's right.
notorious.
Yeah.
Who else? Fred Smith, who rode under that name for reasons that will remain
Okay.
quiet.
I was going to ask about that, but no, we'll keep it.
Tom McQuaid, so on. And in the speed cars, there was Tiger Lewis, who had a service station or a garage over by the cemetery.
Yep.
Bill Stitt, Johnny Hamilton, flashest car I'd ever seen, I think, and unfortunately he wrapped it round a light standard and lost his life. But
Bill Stitt was he was one of the directors of the Speedway
Was
at
he?
some time.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah.
He was one of the guys that were on the committee. Yeah, and raced a speed car.
Don't remember much about him, but I thought he had the most sensible speed car. It had the highest
Hoop.
Yeah, roll bar.
roll bar. No, they didn't have roll bars, but they had sort of built up at the back.
Yeah.
Had some protection for his head, which I guess brings you on to spills. You know, there was the thrills, but there was the spills.
Yeah.
And I think about the steam laundry. I don't know. There was no ambulance there initially, and if someone had to be taken off on a stretcher, then there was an old utility with a covered back, and the stretcher was loaded into that. But I have a suspicion the feet stuck out still. Later on, when they had the St John's ambulance there, we used to, the old style ambulances just had one flashing red light on the top, which they could put on. And if they left the track there, this is when we were at Fowlhouse Corner, if they left the track there, you could see that red light. And if it stopped up there, they were just at this first aid station, and perhaps the doctor was doing some sort of dressing. If that light continued and we saw it flashing and knew it was going out what we called the top gate, we knew
He was on
that was serious. He was on his way to hospital. And in later years, Dr. Parton was my GP.
Okay.
So, we used to see him. He'd hop on the back of a bike, hop on anything to get round to an accident.
Yeah.
And something that always got me, the distraction. Do you remember Professor Wilkinson?
I've heard about him. Yes.
Oh,
Heard about him, yeah.
absolutely. I think it was a motorbike and sidecar he had with a few bits of equipment, and he'd come around at sort of distraction while somebody was being scooped up off the track, sort of thing. And he would get off the bike and it would continue to circle around him.
Yeah.
And he would do all sorts of weird things.
Yeah.
One I never figured, he had a piece of water pipe with a tap on the top, and he'd go plonk into the ground, turn on the tap, and there would appear to be water coming out. But what was also a bit unnerving, it was in the time of Dick Blythe, the announcer. They only seemed to have one record, and it was a ragtime record. So people have been picked up off that track to the black and white rag and all sorts of, silly, incongruous sort of things. Thing that always impressed me was if someone was injured and going to be out for a while, and particularly if it was a bit of a serious injury, then probably the following week the riders would go round with a blanket, couple on each side of the blanket, round the fence, and people would come down from the bank, would and be quite generous throwing money into that blanket, which I thought was wonderful, because a lot of those riders in those days were self-employed and they didn't have there
wasn't the hospital benefit and medical stuff of today.
Yeah.
I notice you've got something up here on Faye Taylor. I don't remember Faye Taylor as a solo rider. She did come back and drove somebody's speed car once and was not a great success. And someone else, one of the regulars, I don't remember who it was, dyed his overalls pink and had red wig sort of coming out of his helmet, said what he thought of this situation, because I think she was being generously paid and was not doing particularly well.
Right.
And so he.
So she was used more of a promoter's tool to get people to come down.
Yes. Yeah, I mean, she was billed as the Wild Irish Colleen, but it had been a long time since she was a Colleen, I think.
But isn't that cool? Isn't that a great thing, you know, to hear that story?
Yeah. But our interest waned a bit. There was less emphasis on the solos and sidecars, which we'd always enjoyed. And, you know, there was the introduction of TQs, stock bikes, demolition derby, fun one night once in a blue moon, but you didn't want to want to see it all.
So you were a traditionalist. You wanted to go to see the solo sidecars and speed cars, and as did you keep going, like when we were getting towards the end in the 90s and towards the end?
No, I didn't. The sort of lost interest. There were other things, work and all sorts of things that got in the way. And then once you didn't know who was riding, you couldn't automatically tell at the end of a race, gee, that was a good time. It must have been close to the record for that. You know, once you lost that,
you have a bit of a gap.
You weren't interested just in people going round and round sort of thing.
Now, you did mention before we came on air that on a Friday you got home from school and you had to hike-tail around the block to get to the gate, and then set up the family rug on the bench. That must have been a great thing for you to do. Were there other kids doing a similar thing? Were there a lot of kids around at that?
I don't remember others. There must have been, but I got sent early because we wanted to sit in the front row down in front of the pits. So I'd have to hightail it right up Greylands Road and round the bend, get in at the main gate, which was the only gate you could get in at that stage, and then all the way back round the showgrounds back to the side really on which we lived, the closest to which we lived.
And am I right in saying you used to have access to the showground, but not on a Friday? You used to do a bit of running around and saw a lot of practice and different things?
No, never. I never ever went to speedway practice, but I used to, you'd know Tuesday night was practice night, and track wasn't watered very much. You'd see the dust going up. You'd hear the bikes. You could tell from our place. I could tell whether it was solos or sidecars by the direction in which they were going, and of course you could get the smell.
So when you were young, I know when I was younger, I tried to recruit people to go to the Speedway all the time, tell them what it was, and unless they went, they actually didn't have a clue what it was. Did you do that as a kid too? Because you're saying there's just you and another girl that sort of went regularly. Did you try to tell the other kids, you've got to go because you've got to take your parents?
No, I don't think so, because it was just it was sort of as much as anything a family thing. That's what you did on a Friday, the Speedway on, that's what you did. Until my parents went to the country at that stage, and my sister and I, well, sometimes there were other activities on to do with work, study, things like that. But I still always supported the speedway at the Claremont venue while it was going. You know, it was noisy, but it was noisy once a week.
Yeah.
Practice, they didn't use lights, so they finished well and truly early. But even on a Friday night, it was not terribly late, and the noise went much quite quickly. They sort of dispersed. And like so many of the people who complained the loudest had moved in well after after the speedway.
Yeah.
And oh yes, and people who used to say to me, "Oh, how do you live there? What about Friday nights in the speedway?" And I'd say, "Yeah, go out on the back lawn and take a deep breath and love it."
Yeah. What were the crowds like that you can remember back in the early days? Was there a big crowd on an international night, or when they had a test team over, or the average crowd was just?
There was a good. I never really estimated the crowd, but there was a good crowd. Of course, the pits eventually were extended down to the fence, and we'd shifted from there anyway.
Yeah.
But round on Fowlhouse Corner, the banks would be well and truly dotted with people sitting on rugs, and then some would still sit down on the fence, and there were more fence seats there, more rows of seats on that side than there were on the pit side.
Yeah.
I went. Someone said, "Oh, you've got to go." Just before it finished, I wasn't there on the last night, but we did go along, and it seemed to me a lot of it was spectacle, not actually racing.
Yeah.
And we couldn't get over, somebody only needs a couple of waves of a checkered flag. You don't need to have somebody dancing with a checkered flag at the finish. Don't, and we killed ourselves laughing at utes loaded with chrome and flags and so on, pushing speed cars. I mean, it was everybody on the back of a car originally.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, times have changed a lot.
The promotion must have been the biggest thing, over the years from when you started going, and then all of a sudden, promotion was about getting people there. It's the only way, get it on Facebook and get it on computers and TV, and that would have changed immensely in that time.
That'd be huge.
Yeah. And what did you think of, apart from those few things? Did you think did it still grab you, or did you think, well, it's nothing like I used to?
Well, it's hard to be grabbed by something when you don't really understand it. I mean, you couldn't understand. You need to know I think you need to know the riders. You need to know the times, so that you can really appreciate that was a damn good race.
Yeah, absolutely, because if you go there, like football, cricket, if you don't know who's playing and you rock up, it might be a good game, but you actually don't know who's done what. I agree with you. So that falls back on sort of people like us, media and all that, to make sure that people are educated that what people do and how good they are. So who are some of your favourites? I know you mentioned some that you'd seen. Who was some of the people that you went, wow, that person can ride or that person can drive, and it was
as initially my favourite solo rider was Wally Higgs.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
Of course, they all had other jobs. They weren't professionals.
No.
Jack Sharp, you saw his name on his shed as you went over the Fremantle traffic bridge. Down on the water's edge. I presume he was marine motors and so on. Wally Higgs, I believe, was a motor trimmer or something.
Okay.
A number were involved with garages and so on. No, I'd just like to see sort of good racing, I think.
Yeah. looked at as heroes in your eyes as well? Like with so many people that used to go there and go, wow, it was on par with football, cricket and all that kind of stuff as, heroes of racing. Did you feel that too? Or they were just like people that were just having fun and just going to go racing and we just enjoyed watching?
Oh, we enjoyed watching, but yeah. I mean, we also saw Orb Lawson and one of our local boys was Rusty Wainwright. He lived around the corner. You could hear him tuning his bike, much to the neighbours' annoyance, at odd hours sort of thing during day or night.
Yeah.
So
Chum would have been in full swing.
Chum Taylor was, would have been the champion when we sort of gave up.
Yeah. And Chum's still going. He's still around.
I believe.
Not that well in health at the moment, but g'day to Chum. I think it's just wonderful to hear a different aspect of what Claremont was. I started going in the late 60s. You started going in the 80s?
72 I was born, so pretty much 72 onwards, yeah.
Yeah. And to hear...
Late 40s.
You read a lot about the old days and Ken Brown, he's perfect for writing about the early days of Speedway, but to hear it from someone who was there is just wonderful. So
we appreciate you coming on, and if you've got anything else you want to say, please do, because we've got to.
No, I think that just about covers it.
It gives us a look at what it was like back in the day, and it's something completely different, and great to sit here in this Claremont Museum with this Claremont Speedway display and talk about exactly what we're looking at. It's fantastic.
Well, thank you, Ethel, for coming.
My mother, when she, my father had gone to the country working, but whenever he was down, he went there, and my mother, continued to go. She was she enjoyed it just as much.
Fantastic.
Yeah.
Great. Thank you very much for coming on this show. Really enjoyed your company, and we're glad that you can come down to a place like this and start reliving some of those memories all those years ago, Pedro.
Yeah. Yep. Thank you, Ethel. Great to chat. Thank you.
Good.
All right. Well, we're going to finish that one with Ethel, and we're going to take a break, and we'll come back with another special guest here at Slightly Sideways. Well, welcome back to Slightly Sideways. We have another special guest with us today, and we shouldn't have to introduce this guy, to be honest. Everyone should know who he is, but we will.
Mr. Nostalgia.
Yeah, Mr. Nostalgia, but we will anyway. Along with me, Pedro again, and I appreciate his help in these Claremont series. Ken Brown is the guy to our left, and he's known as the Stats Man, and one of the, we say a lot of legend stuff about Speedway competitors because, everyone looks at the Speedway competitor and watches what they do, but I can tell you now, this bloke to our left is probably more legendary than most because of the time and effort that this bloke's put in over many, many years. Trying times, good times, bad, and Pedro, I'll tell you what, I take my hat off to Ken Brown. So thanks, Ken, for joining us, and I'll let Pedro fire away with your first question, mate.
No problems.
Brownie is an important part of the sport. It's behind the scenes stuff, and as you say, we have drivers here come in and chat about their careers. But when you think about what happens, after the event, through the week and before the event, it's all about the promotion. It's about the recording of the history. It's about the photography, and without that, the sport just doesn't happen. Yep. So, Ken, I agree with you, mate. Ken is just such an important part. Brownie, 1966. You got started with this circus?
True.
Are you happy about that or not?
I think overall, yes. I actually, I think I was telling Pedro earlier on, back in primary school, I was about 11 years old, and all Lawson used to go around to the schools giving out kids free tickets with a paying a dog, which I think was a great promotion. And I got one of those, came home and pestered my parents. So we lived in Bayswater, and I remember my mum and myself and one of my brothers caught the train, went down to Claremont. This was during the stock car days.
Yep.
I was about 11, 12 years old, and it's funny, I don't remember the solos, the sidecars or the speed cars that I'm assuming would have been on the show,
Yeah.
Just remember the stock cars, you know?
Yeah.
Because they were just amazing, and they used to throw 44-gallon drums out in front of them and all this sort of stuff, and they'd smash into the fence, you know, and it was wow, amazing, you know?
Yeah.
Now, is it true that they brought in the stock cars because things were on a bit of a lean off? The crowds weren't coming, and perhaps the stars weren't developing through, and they needed something to get the people to come back.
Yeah, I mean, they had big crowds after the war, of course, Second World War, and I guess after so many years it maybe got a bit, same old, perhaps. Speed cars obviously started after World War II, but in the 50s, I think it not died, but it sort of faded away quite a lot around the world, in England as well. And the stock car idea came from America, I believe, and it spread to England and then to Australia, and of course it put bums back on seats again. You know, people were wowing at all these cars crashing into the fence and into each other and rolling over and this sort of stuff, you know. But it only lasted a couple of years, you know.
Yeah.
And they introduced lady races in the stock cars as well. We had, you know...
I think Mick Jenneff's wife, I believe, was one of them,
so that was another thing that came in, apart from Faye Taylor
earlier on,
solo earlier.
Yeah.
The ladies got involved in the stock cars. So
It wasn't like golf, gentlemen only, ladies forbidden.
No.
Which was a good thing.
No.
You know, because it
I don't know whether they were forbidden. I guess in the early days, riding motorcycles was a pretty well 100% male occupation, if you like. And like Peter mentioned, Faye Taylor, who born in Ireland, lived in England, and a bit of a tomboy. She started riding motorbikes in scrambles and that sort of stuff. And she talked her way into it with a friend to have a trial in one of the English tracks in the late 20s, and he was quite impressed with this person, you know, in a helmet and leathers. That you can come along on the weekend and race. And she took her helmet off, and he said, "What? You can't race? You're a female, you know." Yeah. But she talked her way into it, and then of course she came to Australia and New Zealand and wowed the fans here, you know, back in 27, 28.
Just before we came on, we discussed how Faye came to Australia on a ship and basically contacted the Speedway and said, "I'm arriving on such and such a date.
Yeah.
You know,
I'll
be on the start line.
I'll be there. in 3 weeks.
Caught the plane. Caught the train. Get it right. Caught the boat, of course, in those dates. All they had in England with 2 Douglas motorbikes, and cabled the people here to say, "Hey, I'm arriving on this date." And she raced here for a couple of weeks, and they did the same thing in Adelaide, and then went to Melbourne and Sydney and whatever. So amazing occurrence to happen way back then, you know.
And then to think that, was it 20 years later she was back in a speed car?
Well, it was after the war in the 50s, so maybe almost 30 years, yeah.
Wow. That's incredible, isn't it, when you think about it? So she must have been a young girl. She came here, she would have been in her 50s, I suppose.
I guess, yeah. She also did some road racing too, I believe. Not in Australia, but really amazing sort of person. And reading a biography, she said she wasn't really women's liberal, and that was just that if someone said she couldn't do something, she'd prove that, hey, I can, you know.
Yeah.
And certainly made a mark in Speedway around the world.
That's cool.
But Pedro, you mentioned 1966. That's when I started with the writing side of things. Used to always go to we went to Claremont every couple of weeks, I guess, with a friend of mine, and we always sat in the back straight. I always used to sit behind a sound thing that worked. Had my program, had my program and my pencil, and I used to put all the results in. And sitting there was January '66, and they came around selling this newspaper from the Eastern States, National Speed Sport. I bought a copy for 10 cents, I think it was, and next day took it home and read it cover to cover. And they said they're looking for people to be their correspondents around the country. So with my program, I sort of wrote out a bit of a story and sent it off. They never printed that one, but I got a letter back saying, "Hey, you're the WA representative for us." And it started in '66 and ended up 57 years later. I'm still doing it. You know,
what an opportunity!
Yeah. Well,
what the sport would have lost if Ken actually didn't do that?
Oh, yeah.
I know they say if I don't do it, someone else would.
Yeah,
but I don't actually believe that also.
Yeah, no,
and probably not the same.
Sometimes it doesn't happen like that.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, I enjoy the writing, and and wrote for most of the magazines around the place, and even for ones in America and the UK as well. But probably in the 50s, 70s. It's funny, you've probably heard of Larry Rice, the American speed car driver. He came out here, and he was an ex-school teacher like I was, and I got chatting to him and got to know him and that, and he brought out some yearbooks from America, the USAC, United States Auto Club, and I looking through these. They're like an A4 size book, 200 plus pages, every result of every race. And back in those days, they ran the Indy cars. They also ran the midgets or the speed cars, the wingless sprint cars, stock cars on dirt, and all these results were there, the champions over the year, the feature race winners, this sort of stuff, the annual event winners. And I went, wow, that's amazing. And I had this brainstorm, which I probably shouldn't have done, but I thought, hey, we should do the same thing here in Australia, initially Western Australia. So you might remember Trevor Lawrence, who sat alongside the announcers for many years up there in the PO box as a coordinator. Trevor had a set of programs going back, not everyone, but pretty well from the start after World War II. So I borrowed that for probably about 20 years and, used them as my Bible and go through with and started using those to get results, feature race winners, championships, etc., and it just grew from there. And bit of a mug, I decided to do that interstate and overseas, and I still muck around with it these days now.
It's excited you.
It was something I enjoy doing. I mean, it's quite tedious and frustrating at times, but I love doing it.
This is your life, but that's the Bible. The all-time Claremont Speedway fact file, end of an era, 1927 to 2000 by Ken Brown.
Yeah, spruik it, Brownie, because you can purchase this too.
Yeah.
And many other Ken's books we'll talk about.
That's only one of Ken's books we've got here in a pile. But this book here with I sort of love that stuff too. Gets me excited when I think about, statistics, yes, but recording the sport from as far back as you can go to as far up to date as you can go.
I think just quickly for the butt in, one of the things that really annoyed me over the years was you can go into a bookstop and you can get a book on cricket or football, any of the football codes, and you can read, every score that Don Bradman made or whatever, all the grand finals. It's already available for call them the major sports, if you like, around the country. Speedway, bugger all, isn't there? There was virtually nothing, Yeah. And that's one thing that really, I suppose, inspired me to try and do something about that. I mean, the fact file started as a couple of sheets of typewritten paper that I photocopied on the school photocopier without them knowing. And it just,
you a bill now.
the idea was just to get a bit of information out to the announcers and the people who were doing the writing around the place, the Alan Schofields and Cole Phillips, etc., that did it here for quite a few years. So there's information for them, as well as the announcers, like I said. And it sort of grew and added more to it year by year until I think when in the last year of Claremont, the 1999-2000 season, I got some sort of photocopied and started selling a few of them. It's just something to do, and it sort of grew from that. Then later on, of course, I did a proper book out of it. So and I'm quite proud of it. It's got a few mistakes in, obviously, as the things do, but
no, it hasn't. But mate, you can. It's everything you want to know about Claremont Speedway, because it's got every feature race winner, four-wheel feature race winner.
Yeah.
It goes back as far as it can with sidecars, and solos.
With the championships,
Yeah.
And we forget real quick because Speedway goes every week. You might be at Quanah this week, and then I'm going to Albany, and then it's somewhere else, and that many things happen. You forget who ran second, third, and then you start forgetting who won the state title in 3 years ago. In different divisions. That's what I love about what you do, because you can then go back and go, hang on a minute, I just want to check if they actually did that, and you're surprised. I always read these things and I go, I'm always surprised every time I read it. Like, wow, I didn't realise that, even though I probably read it again, which. And
there are some facts in here that does blow your mind, because there's a lot of things that people don't realise, that certain guys won a championship and didn't win another one for 25 years.
Yeah.
It's incredible stuff. And
I mean, there's a lot of amazing stories, I guess, about Speedway, on the bikes or the cars. And like I said, I was motivated by the fact of a lot of the information wasn't out there, especially when it started in 1927. And I think I was editor of the program for a couple of years in the mid 70s, and that's when I started putting that in the program as well. And people sort of liked it, and it motivates you to keep on going, and do some more on that side of things.
What was that like, Ken, being a program editor? You only did it for a couple of seasons.
Yeah, it was good. It was good.
That because it was too difficult, or it was a pain to do?
Well, it was just something I did for a couple of years, like I said. You obviously, after the meeting, you made a few notes, whatever, if you're writing a column, etc., which I was doing anyway for the other magazines. But used to often, back in those days, Connor lived out in Morley, and I was not far away, so we'd go down on a Saturday afternoon and discuss a few things. Probably on about a Tuesday, I'd go into Compact Print. I think it was Terry Bick was the editor there, and read through what they'd printed out for any mistakes, put captions on the photos, that sort of thing. So it was only a couple of days or a couple of afternoons, if you like, with a few hours that it involved. But it was just something I did for a couple of years, and then I thought, I'll try something different, Some young upstart called Brad Thompson took over, I think.
Yeah, that's right. And he did that for a fair few years.
He did. Brad did that, yeah, as well as the announcing.
Yeah.
It's all good to take on one thing, but someone like Kenny, I'm just trying to give people perspective out there that are in the Speedway in the last 5-10 years, But Ken would write for all the national magazines over different things, different divisions. We sometimes, if you're racing, you're in your own division, your own car, you worry about your own stuff. Where Ken's trying to do the whole lot, from bikes to sprint cars, supers, you name it. He's trying to get timelines done into programs and different publications around. That's not an easy job to keep control of, plus your fact files and all that kind of stuff. Takes up a lot of time, Kenny. How did you deal with that, the time it takes?
You just do it, I guess. It's a hobby that became an obsession, I suppose. I would always take notes when I was at the track, and you'd almost be a lap scorer, and put down numbers one lap after another, and then you could sit back the next day and try and put it all together and decide who passed who and what happened in the race.
Yeah.
It's something that you got used to doing. One stage there, I was probably writing for 3 national magazines, and they all wanted a story on this meeting. So you had to write a different version, if you like, of the same thing.
So it was unique.
Instead of say that Billy Bloggs won the feature race, but you put more detail in one, or maybe go heat by heat another one, or try and work out a different way of doing it. But that was a bit tiresome at times and made you think a bit. But it was something was just part of the show. You did it,
And it was not only Claremont that you looked after. Back in the 60s, when you started doing your writing, you would be at Forestfield one Sunday, Wattle Grove at the next Sunday, then back to Forestfield. You'd mix in with Bibra Lake
as well, yeah. The three winter tracks, yeah.
Yeah, and
then a bit later on, Bunbury came on the scene as well.
So every Sunday, you'd be at a speedway.
Well, every Friday night, as from the show, first the end of the show until almost Easter, and then
and then winter tracks.
Winter time, there was the Sunday tracks. Yeah. It was a love. You got to love the sport. And,
you do. Yeah. So you've eased back a bit at the moment, Ken.
Well, yeah. Even when I was doing the column in the West Australian, you weren't doing long race reports because you didn't have room for it. It was just like a couple of paragraphs. So I wasn't doing the long notes that I used to do years ago. And of course the internet came on the scene, and nowadays you can go on the internet half an hour after World of Outlaws race in America, and there's the full story, all the results, photos, all online. Things have become instant. Where in the early days, you never heard what happened in America until 3 or 4 weeks later, till a magazine came out or someone rang somebody and found out. So it's changed a lot in that way, and I haven't been writing race reports. Well, sorry, I tell a lie. I haven't been doing it for the bikes up at Pinjar Park. For a good long friend of mine, a long-time friend of mine, Peter White with Speedway World, and he also goes over to Speedway Star in England. But as far as Kwinana goes, I really haven't been writing race reports as such for a long time, because as I say, I was doing the West, and the magazines only wanted a short story, not the big long one they used to have. There's so many tracks around these days and so much news out there, so things changed, But it was what it was, and you still enjoy doing it.
Yeah, absolutely. We're going to take a break and thank some sponsors and come back and talk with the great legend, Ken Brown and Pedro, and we're going to have a good chat about some of the things races that he remembers, people that he liked and disliked maybe, and a few other things chucked in as well. So keep watching Slightly Sideways, and thank you very much.
Speedway rider, one of a small group of men who thrill thousands in what is probably the most dangerous sport in the world. He's certainly dressed up for it, but it's all very necessary. The padded leather suit protects his body from a too-hurried contact with Mother Earth, sometimes under a couple of 100 pounds of motorcycle. The crash helmet acts as a kind of a buffer between the rider's head and the track in the event of a spill. Oddly enough, eye shield anti-gas make ideal speedway goggles. They're light and give a wide range of vision. Now what's he looking for? Oh, the metal ski. This fits onto the sole of his left boot, which spends more time on the track than on the machine, especially when broadsiding. The smooth metal surface enables the rider to slide his foot along the track, taking some of his weight off the machine. A handkerchief or scarf protects the face. Flying cinders from the track play havoc with the complexion. It sounds as if they're racing, so let's go out onto the track. Sliding round the bends at terrific speed, so close together that one mistake might prove fatal. Who are these men who seem to defy even the laws of gravity? Men like Vic Duggan, Australian champion, probably the world's finest rider. Wilbur Lamoureux, the mighty Atom from America. Jack Parker, captain of England and Bellevue, and his brother Norman, who also rides for England and is captain of Wimbledon. The ever-popular veteran Max Grosskreutz. Orb Lawson, the young and spectacular rider from Australia. And Lionel Van Praag, the only world champion riding today. He's ridden in more than 5,000 races and is still at the top of his form. Coincidentally, Van supervised the production of this film. Now, let's look at the track first. It is less than 400 yards round and is covered with hundreds of tons of cinders or similar material to make a loose and shifting surface. This enables the riders to broadside round the bends at terrific speeds. The surface has to be constantly raked and leveled, for it certainly gets shifted around. And these are the machines that do the shifting. They only weigh about 200 pounds and are usually built to suit the particular style of each rider. The single-cylinder 3.5 horsepower engine develops over 40 horsepower on the track, and this needs expert tuning and the use of a special alcohol fuel called dope. And by the way, if you're thinking of getting one for your weekend outings, they only do 10 miles per gallon, about the same as a motor bus. And they have no brakes or gearbox. They're controlled by the throttle or accelerator and the clutch, but the clutch is used only for starting. They're off again. This time a match race between Oliver Hart of England and Max Grosskreutz of Australia. And what a race! No quarter arts or given. Both machines flat out, rising and straining like mad things, controlled only by the superhuman efforts of the riders. First one, then the other in the lead. Men wrestling with tortured metal, getting every last ounce of power from the machine. They're only a few inches apart. If they touch, anything may happen. They're near the finish. Australia just a wheel in front. Can Oliver Hart snatch victory now? He's done it. No, it's a dead heat.
Thanks for watching Slightly Sideways. Welcome back. We're in part 2 of Ken Brown's talk. Me and Pedro love talking to Brownie, and we don't get a chance to do it that often. He gets to go for a coffee with him every now and again, which is great. And Pedro, you've got a few things in front of you too that we can talk about with Ken.
Yeah, just going back, Brownie, to your books that you've published. That was a dream of yours to do for many years.
Yeah, well, I mean, I started with the fact file, I guess, which sort of grew year by year, but going into the Batty Library in Perth many years ago, when you put the the film in and followed through with a newspaper. When I first did it, went back to 1927, and all I did was the West Australian. I didn't know any different. Later on, with internet, of course, we have the library site now called Trove, Trove, which is a great site. You go to any newspaper, say early in the 50s, anyway, all around Australia. I go in there and you type in Speedway 1927, and I was just blown away because there was much more Speedway around than was in the West Australian,
Yeah.
And when I checked on the first meeting at Claremont, there were 6 different newspaper reports.
That's
And
amazing.
that sort of blew me away. Yeah. One was the Kalgoorlie, one of the Kalgoorlie newspapers, and I went, the Kalgoorlie Miner. I thought, it must be just a copy of something down it. No, it was a separate story that went into the Kalgoorlie paper.
You've got a kid in a candy store from what you do, be like, oh wow, I didn't realise that. Cool.
I mean, that gave me the idea. I thought there's so much good stuff in it because the newspaper reports back in those days were absolutely amazing. Full results. You had the West Australian, the Daily News, the Sunday Times, other papers like the Mirror and the Weekend News and God knows what else. There was a stack of them. They all had Speedway in it.
Yeah.
And I thought this is too good not to have out there. So I started doing the books, not to make any money out, and it cost me money, but what I'm very proud of is that there's 2 copies of each of those in the library in Perth. So if anybody wants to go in the future, to check on what happened in 1927 or 1947 or whatever, that's available.
Just grab a couple there, Brownie.
Okay. This one is a companion to the fact file. It's just the main event. It just covers the feature race winners in the 4 car sections, which again more detailed than the fact file.
We'll take some pictures of these and put them up.
This is the first season, 1927-28. The lights go on, which again got over 100 pages, I believe. And I got to the stage about halfway through. I thought, my God, I've got to sort of watch what I'm doing here because they're going to have too much in it. It's going to be volume 1, volume 2. So, like I said, the volume of stuff around those was amazing, and that sort of led me to the next season and the next season. I think there's about 4 or 5 now. That's the first season, like I said. The 30s, there was only a couple of seasons at Claremont because of the what do you call it? Whatever. What's it called? when people were out of the depression. People were out of work or whatever. So only a couple of seasons, but they were pretty amazing seasons with English and Australian riders coming over, etc., etc. So that's that one. Then after the war, there's a couple. This is the last one I did, which is 47 to 54, which is about as far as it goes in Trove, as far as the newspaper reports go. But I did a couple of other ones on sprint cars, going back 2 or 3 years ago. There's the World Series sprint car fact file, the USA vs WA Speedweek fact file, and the AHG sprint car series, which is now, of course, the Matting Toyota one. All of the facts and figures I had on those shows, I put on into books with a lot of colour photos from a good friend of mine, Peter Roebuck. And I found out almost by accident that back in 1930 there was a Singapore Speedway which had a WA connection. A guy who was one of the publicity officers at Claremont went over to Singapore, raised the money to build a 1/4-mile track and grandstands, etc., and they started in 1930 they brought over a couple of the WA riders, Tiger Lewis and Charlie Datsun, to coach the locals, and typical Speedway promotion. They had so-and-so from China and so-and-so from Singapore and so-and-so from the Cocos Islands, just all the locals, and they ran a test match, China versus Australia, this sort of stuff, it was amazing stuff. I mean, I only ran 5 shows. The first one, I believe, was the biggest crowd ever at a sporting event in Singapore. Wow. But after about 4 or 5 shows, it sort of faded away, and the guy involved disappeared with the money before they knew what was happening. So
his name was Kim.
Great story that I loved writing about. And just only a year or so ago, I did this one, which is the midget racing down under, the very first season in Australia, 34-35 in Melbourne, because some of you probably know midgets started in California in the early 1930s, and they just grew like crazy, and tracks got up all over the place. Drivers were racing almost every night of the week. They were even using bicycle velodromes that were banked like you wouldn't believe, and guys were getting killed, and it was just an amazing era. And a fellow from Australia was over there, saw them, liked it, bought a car, brought it back to Australia, and he tried to get it going in Sydney. Didn't work out. He went down to Melbourne, and a guy there running a track there said, "Yep, we'll do that." And they ran the first season, 34, 35, with big crowds. And again, an unknown story. One of the guys, for example, he got injured at work and he couldn't drive, so he got his wife to drive, and that ended up to lady drivers and this sort of stuff. They were even going to have, because news came from, went to America about running the midgets down here. They soon became speed cars. I don't know why, but didn't last the name of midgets very long. But they were going to bring in an Australian team to go to America. And it was only when after a while they realised, when they sort of got the length of the track and the time, they realised that we were running like motorbike engines, and that we would have been slaughtered by the Yank cars, so it didn't ever work out. But an interesting fact that I came across that sort of blew me away was, they had lights obviously for night racing, and the infield was grassed obviously, and towards the end of the season, say about February, March, football, the VFL was starting, and scratch matches. They actually had a scratch match under lights. The first one ever was at this track in Melbourne at Olympic Park.
Wow.
In Melbourne, drew a big crowd. They had speed car races beforehand, speed car race at interval, speed car races afterwards. So it was a great publicity for the football and also for the speedway. So again, an interesting story.
Yeah.
Amazing.
So I've all up, there's 14 of them. You can only buy them online. The best way is to Google Ken Brown Speedway or Ken Brown Speedway books, and I'm sure it'll all come up.
If we see him on a yacht next week, sailing away, we'll be ringing him up. So, hey, you've made too much money, you can't leave us.
Now, mate, you have played a huge role in a couple of books that I've been involved with. Claremont Speedway Snapshots and the Cages and Courageous. Thanks to Ken for he's provided most of the text and stories and articles in this. Various photographers. This of course, the Snapshots book was a recognition of photographers from the Claremont days.
Even some bloke called Jason Sutton, wasn't he?
He made a mention. This one here, a lot of Peter Roebuck's photos and Lou McDonald. So, Ken's played a major role in a lot of publications in WA Speedway, and I think it's time we thank you for that, Ken.
Hey, look, these books are very dear to my heart. I mean, as we know, there are a lot of books come out on the Eastern States tracks, but virtually nothing on Claremont. And Claremont ran longer than the Sydney Showground or the Brisbane Exhibition Ground. So I'm really pleased to get something out there on Claremont, and I think that they've done a great job, Pedro, and if you haven't got one of those books, you should get hold of them, because there's some great photos and stories there on the early days of Claremont Speedway.
Now, over the years, Ken, you've put a lot of time, as you say, from 1966, but you have been decorated a couple of times for your input and your dedication. You were a Claremont Hall of Famer in the final season in 2000.
Yep.
And you were also Knoxville had a outstanding contribution award that you received.
There's the Knoxville Hall of Fame, which if anyone been to Knoxville, it's an amazing place. They run a US sprint car poll every year where all the media people vote on the drivers, and they pick the top 20, etc. But they also vote on driver of the year, rookie of the year, media member of the year, etc., etc. And one of the awards they have is the outstanding contribution to the sport. And John Evans, who was part of Australian Speedway reporting for quite a while there. He was very involved with the people at Knoxville and organised an Australian sprint car pole, which ran for about 15 or so years. Sadly, it faded away because the Knoxville people didn't want to put any more money into it, but it's the way it goes. But I was lucky enough to win the outstanding contribution to the sport one year, which I was very proud to receive. Yeah,
That's good. That's really good.
Kenny, besides all the riding and all that kind of stuff, you've got to deal with a fair few people, I would assume, over the years. Promoters, you know, people around races, all that kind of stuff. I guess that's been probably a joy to meet so many people, so many outstanding, you know, types of people that have done things in the sport. You know, people like Con and, you know, obviously now you've got your Gavins and stuff, but races and all that kind of stuff. You want to talk us through some of that kind of stuff where you're promoters and dealing with actual speedway tracks?
Yeah, well, I sort of feel I'm just a Speedway fan who got lucky, you know, and if I hadn't have answered that request to be the WA correspondent back in 1966, who knows what would have happened. But I did, and I mean, after doing that, I spent the last half of that season, you know, still paying my way to go in. But during the off season, I wrote a letter to Orb Lawson, told him who I was, and you know, could I get a pass? And he said, "Yeah, I've heard of you." And I went, "Oh, that's great." And you know, got a pass to go in, and you feel like then you're part of the scene, you know.
Yeah.
And it's been great to do that in tracks right around WA and for various magazines and newspapers over the years. Look, I've met a lot of people in the sport, met some great people. You know, you get a few that you wouldn't want to see again, but that's happened in any sport, I guess. But
That's going to be us after that.
on the whole, I just always felt very proud and privileged to be part of the scene, if you like. And you know, in that after that first year, my brother Don, who was driving speed cars at the time, said, "You got to go along and join WASDA, the Speed Car Association," which I did, and I was felt, you know, wonderful there to sit alongside and, you know, speak to the Bill Josts and the Laurie Matthews and these sort of guys, Jeff Danton, these sort of guys, you know, who are my heroes on the track. And I didn't do that for more than a couple of years. I sort of felt like I should really be not biased, if you like, but I'm reporting on every section. So if I'm part of this club, there might be some, you know, angst going on or whatever. So I didn't do that from then on, but. Met a lot of people, like I say, and it's great even today to have someone who's a legend in the sport, you know, behind the wheel or the handlebars to come up and say, "G'day, Ken, how you going?" You know, and I really feel honoured that they treat me as an equal, if you like, or I'm part of the scene, you know, because like I said, I just feel like I'm a fan who and still loves the sport and tries to help out, you know, as much as I can. Met some great people. You know, I remember going to Pinjar Park 8-10 years ago and walking through the pits, and there's Ivan Major, and he comes and says, "G'day, Ken, how you going?" I went, "Whoa, there's a guy who's you know, 5-6 times world champion."
Yeah.
Did he get your autograph?
No, he didn't. I forgot my pen. But people like that, you know, I mean, when I was doing the editor of the program, for example, one of those years. Funden, who was a great guy also, but Anders Michenek from Sweden came out and was living with Con and Linda at their place with his wife, and went over there on a Saturday afternoon, as I said, and it was great to meet him off the track and just chat, you know, person to person with him and his wife, you know, coming from Sweden, a place full of ice and snow, and there they are in their bathers, you know, going into the pool in our hot summertime, you know, and he was a great guy. You know, many people like that. You know, I was in awe of Bob Tattersall when he came to Perth, and I remember one time I was going through the pitch with my national speech was over my shoulder, you know, trying to sell them to all the drivers, and he walked up and said, "Oh, is that the latest issue?" "Yeah, Bob, you know. Can I have one?" "Yeah, sure," you know. Didn't ask for 10 cents, you know. And, you know.
Is that why that magazine went broke?
It probably went broke, yeah, all the freebies,
away.
yeah. No, but someone like Bob Tattersall that was really a legend of Speedway, you know, in America and also here, of course. It was amazing to watch him race because, I mean, he was professional and he was showboat, if you like, promotional material well before that ever came into vogue. And like I think I've told Pedro the story that they pushed the car out onto the track early in the night, give it a start, run around, go back in the pits, and they'd be warming it up. Now the Offenhauser motor had a distinctive sound, real bark to it, and he'd be sitting in the pits there, and there'd be a crowd about 10 deep around him, just sitting there and just going, run, 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 everyone's just sort of drooling at this amazing car, and then later on, of course, they'd put him out again, give it a push, and he'd go around to a couple of slow laps, and then he'd put the boot into it, and he'd be flat out around the track, doing his hot laps. And the last time around Foulhouse Corner, he'd be driving one hand with a hand up like this, waving to the crowd, He'd get to the start line and go, and slide it sideways and it'd conk out. Be out of the car, waving to the crowd,
Real showman, yeah.
He was a real showman,
Yeah.
Never forget that.
Yeah. Well, you wouldn't. I mean, that's just something special.
He was just unreal,
Yeah.
Easy to talk to, great guy. I believe he knew motors back to front, and he'd sort of say, "Oh yeah, Claremont, we need that gear." Put in the car,
Yeah.
and away he'd go,
Yeah. Yeah,
he was amazing guy.
Freakish. Yeah. Jeff Stanton tells me a lot of stories about about Tats. He gave him that chat and said, "Mate, if you keep driving like you're driving," he said, "when I come back, you won't be here."
Yeah.
So he said, "Just ease off a bit, mate."
Because back in those, that was the cageless era, and sadly there were quite a few people who paid the ultimate sacrifice. I mean, Sydney used to. Roughly, one guy nearly every year in the 60s passed away, from an accident. We had 3 here. So and this is one thing that changed over the years. Back in those days, when a speed car crashed, everything shut down. The PA turned off. There was just silence. And the lady who was here mentioned Dr. Lee Parton, who was the doctor there for many years. He'd be on the back of one of the utes. He'd drive over to the scene. Pardon me. Check out the guy, and he either flashed his torch towards the PA box, which meant the guy's okay. The sound came back on, and they'd be big, give him a big round of applause, rah, rah, rah. Or he flashed his torch towards the ambulance, and the ambulance come in and take the guy away to hopefully,
hopefully only up to the
first aid room or the hospital,
And if it goes further, as Ethel said, it was serious.
And I mean, let's face it, those cageless days, when a car flipped upside down, it was pretty dangerous stuff, and there were some miracle escapes, and there's sadly some people who who didn't survive. But it's part of the sport. People sort of say to me, they're crazy, and I said, yeah, maybe they are, but they're dedicated. It's almost like an addiction, And you look at the footballers who play football sometimes long after they should have given it away because the legs aren't working, but they love it so much, love being part of the scene.
It's hard to get out of it.
Similar thing with Speedway, yeah. I mean, there's so many stories of solo riders that crashed on a Friday night, went to hospital Thursday afternoon or Friday morning, out of hospital, strapped up the ribs or whatever, back on the bike and rode the next Friday night. Yeah. I mean, Graham Harris put a foot throttle on his sidecar one time because he stuffed up his wrist.
Yeah.
Les Sharp did the same with his solo, swapped it over because one hand wasn't working. So imagine trying to drive and the accelerator on the other side to what you used to.
But you had to be out there, didn't you?
Yeah.
Unless you were in hospital and you couldn't get out.
Yeah.
You'd be at the track and you'd be on your bike or in your car.
And look, I take my hat off to these guys. I mean, they make football look like wimps, the way they still ride or drive with injuries or whatever, Do you
have a favourite era, Ken?
Favourite era?
Era, yeah, of 60s, 70s, 80s, or just blends in.
That's a difficult one because each era was so different. Things changed. I mean, I started going in the 60s with the cages of sprint cars. Speed car, sorry, and then later on we got the super modifieds the sedans came first of all, then the super modifieds and the sprint cars. So that, I mean, I love the bikes, the solos and the sidecars, but I also loved all the car division as well. I was sort of a bit of everything, I like a good Formula 500 race as much as I like a sprint car race or a speed car race. I think each of those guys in the different divisions were top of the heap, as far as they go, and so I can't really give it a special era. If you talk about drivers or riders, I mean, on the bikes, you can't go past Chum Taylor, of course, for Claremont. He beat so many world champions here; it wasn't funny, We saw Ovi Funden, 5 times world champion from Sweden. Ivan Major, I mentioned, from New Zealand, Anders Michenek. The British test teams were great because they brought big crowds, and it was like a football game. They were barracking for their team and barracking for their riders and that sort of stuff, which you don't often see, Then we had, of course, then we had the cars. We had the Yank Super Sedan, or sedan teams, etc., which were a lot of fun.
Lot to write about with those guys. Because people like Jack Hewitt, and they always made controversy, so it would have made your job quite interesting.
Yeah, it was. I mean, and it was. I love the some of the Yanks on the microphone. They were amazing. I think when Big Ed Wilbur sort of said, "I'm glad you people are here today because you're keeping the flies off us," and this sort of stuff. And they loved the crowd to boo them. It was all promotion. It was all this sort of stuff.
They're paying for a ticket, no matter what they like you or not. Yeah.
And I think Blair Shepherd from Queensland, who won Australian titles in the Offenhouses, and one time he rocked, his car was normally black, he rocked up in a gold lame race suit, and at the interview he was saying to the people, whatever you do, whatever you're going to throw at me, just throw money, this sort of stuff. They were just great characters, I
remember one night talking about getting the crowd stirred up. I was at the Speedway, I must have been early 70s, maybe, mid-70s. Johnny Langfield went out the gate and must have hit the tape.
Got excluded.
He got excluded, and the guys are flying around, and he pulled up across the track, parked his bike, across the track. They're still going. They kept the race going because they said, "You're out, mate." And he was going off his trolley at the tower.
Yeah, where the stewards were. Yeah.
And the crowd, it was like a footy crowd. And I think that's one night that really made me realise how good Speedway can be.
Passionate it is.
It was packed, and it was as loud as you could get, having to go at Johnny Langfield. Yeah.
I mean, we had the test team, we had the Australian Championships, for example.
Yeah.
And, there were controversies, there were things that happened, obviously, like that. Of course. That people remember. I mean, it's funny, my son was in Cubs or Scouts one time, and I went to pick him up one day after, on a Wednesday afternoon or evening, and the guy came out and said, "Oh, you're involved with the Speedway?" I said, yeah. He said, "Oh, I went there last week, it was great." He said, "This white car rolled over 3 times." And I went, "Oh yeah, white car, Keith Mann, 3-time Australian speed car champion. Him was just a white car, he didn't have a clue who it was, didn't care,
Yeah.
And it made me realise that for us guys that know everybody and all this sort of stuff, there's people out there just see cars running around in circles.
Yeah.
And they go there to watch the spectacle and don't really know who's who or and don't really care,
It's just entertainment value.
I often compare Speedway to a lot of other sports in the areas. There is no other sport, as far as I'm aware of, that brought out as many different nationalities, champions, teams than Speedway ever did.
Yeah.
Obviously, we always say thanks to Con mainly, but you could go to the Speedway for the full season and see all different nationalities of champions from every type of different division. That doesn't happen anywhere else.
Yeah,
that's right.
The solos especially, because it started in, we're having supposedly the 100-year anniversary in December this year from 1923 when John Hoskins had the racing meeting at Maitland. Now there are definitely other meetings before that, but that one to me is amazing because it was the catalyst, if you like, that took Speedway around the world. Because Hoskins was there for a couple of years, then he went to Newcastle, ran the Speedway there, then he went to the first season of the Sydney Showground, and would you believe when he was there, a group of about 4 WA guys on Harley Davidson motorbikes and sidecars travelled across the Nullarbor. Would have been a hell of a journey in those days, and they were guests at the Sydney Showground. And they must have got in his ear about how great WA was. And the Sydney Showground season apparently was pretty wet. They didn't make a lot of money. Hoskins packed up and brought his family over here, and he started Claremont, and the rest is history,
Yeah.
So that hadn't happened, because at the end of that season, Hoskins left with Sig Schlam, Charlie Daston and Ron Johnson went to England with a group of other guys who were on the same boat that come from a different promoter from Queensland, was sending them across to England as well. He was there when Speedway kicked off in England, and Hoskins stayed there till into his 70s, 80s, promoting Speedway,
Yeah.
And of course it went spread across Europe, to America, South America even, South Africa, you name it.
Incredible.
Certainly the motorbike speedway, we have a world championship which has been held since the 1930s, and even today, there's probably 7 or 8 different nationalities in the finals.
Yeah.
It's a worldwide sport.
Do you it's hard. I've been lucky enough to go around Australia watching a lot of speedway stuff and America. What do you think Claremont had that no other tracks ever had, as far as I'm concerned? Could you put your finger up? Do you even know what it is?
It had atmosphere. I don't know why. I can remember driving down on a Friday night, always to go in the entrance by Claremont Oval there, and you drive into the showgrounds and you hear the of the bikes warming up. You smell the Castrol R oil and the hamburgers, and the hair in the back of your neck stood up. It was just amazing, Yeah. And I don't know what it was. It had something.
Isn't that a great analogy? Because he hasn't even said he watched a race yet, and here he's on the back of his neck standing up, and that's exactly what it was.
Yeah. Before you even get in.
Yeah.
It just grabbed you. It was something that I loved summer because I knew I'd go to Claremont every Friday night.
Yeah.
And I remember even driving there. I used to live in Wembley, came along and come along the back part of Shenton Park, opposite the railway line and the cemetery. And when I saw the light towers, I get that feeling. It's just that, and then you'd speed up a bit.
You're stuck in traffic and going, hurry up, let's get going.
But I mean, there's so many stories. Like I was teaching in Maylands in the early days, and going down after school, 3:15, 3:30, whatever, get home, get ready to go to the speedway, and I'm tonking down this road, and suddenly the speed car goes past me. What? Kevin Park from New South Wales was here, and he was testing out his car on the road. They did in those days. And you couldn't do it nowadays. But I mean, I believe some of the early hot rods got driven home to the bar behind the car, and they had all 4 wheels, and it wasn't a trailer. They were just driving on the road behind with the car behind. If the car packed up, it'd get in the hot rod and just drive it home. These things happen. It was just amazing.
Rod Hooper and Trevor Kenworthy did that one night, and they had an oil leak.
Yeah.
And went all over them. But they drove home to Shenton Park, just out and around the corner, who's going to worry?
I think with Jeff Pilgrim, the speed car come off the trailer going to the track and rolled over.
That's right.
Yeah.
And Miles Tomlinson and Spin, they lost the sidecar into a lady's rose garden off the trailer. Had to go back and pull it out.
But I mean, hasn't the speedway changed? I mean, the bikes were on the back of a car, like you have the hook there, thing for a push bike.
Yeah.
The motorbike fits there as well, or on the back of a ute,
Yeah.
The early car divisions were on an open trailer. You carried a couple of spare tyres and a toolbox, and that was it.
That was it.
You look at the transporters these days for the sprint cars, for example. You've got $1 million plus.
Yeah.
Spare wings, spare motors, spare this, spare that. All the drawers pull out with shocks and God knows what else.
I find
it's amazing.
It's brilliant, but I also find that it's the worst advertising that's gone for us, because you used to be able to drive around and it's like a John Day ute. Everyone sees a John Day ute. There's a John Day ute. You know what it is.
Yeah.
So when you drive around, the Perth Metro realistically, and you see a race car in the back of a trailer, you go, "Oh wow, there's such a Bert Vosbergen."
Yeah.
Where now, because they're all enclosed and a lot of them don't really have a lot of signage, maybe a number and a name, people go, "What's that?" And I think that's maybe something that we've lost, and it should be more of whatever the car is inside, the sticker is of the car or something.
Yeah, back in the old days too, we had a lot of exhibitions in shopping centres quite regularly, with 7 or 8 cars or bikes, and they were giving away pamphlets and God knows what else, and that really brought the sport to the people, That's happened a little bit these days, but not nearly as much as it used to,
Yeah. Do you find Speedway's gotten a lot busier in a lot of ways, or less busy, or
with talking about the transport, etc. Back in the old days, I don't know, there was a much more camaraderie between the drivers. I mean, if your car crashed, every other guy left his car and went back to yours to fix it in the pits, to get out for the next race. They'd lend you part, lend you this, whatever. That doesn't happen these days as much. I mean, I'm sure it happens occasionally, but they've got all their spares in the back anyway, you know.
Yeah.
But I mean, it again makes it a sport of the haves and the have-nots, you know. And even in the old days, you know, an average mechanic could build a reasonable car in his backyard shed and you know, win race. He wouldn't be top of the heap sort of thing, but he'd be competitive, you know what I mean? Nowadays, it's just cubic dollars, you know.
Yeah.
And I think
if you go back to the early days where the cars, say the speed cars, were handicapped, you know, and the fastest guys went to the rear. Because the guy off the front had an old clunker of a car, and he was probably a new driver, and the car wasn't half as good as the guy off the back, you know. Whereas nowadays you go down to any division almost, and the car in the front of the field is as good as the car at the back of the field. Pretty well, you know. They're much of a muchness.
Yeah.
I mean, drivers these days will say, I'm not going to go to the back of the field. I'm going to start off the front row. If I win the time trial, I'm going to start at the front. Whereas you go back to the Jeff Stantons and the Graham Jones and these sort of guys, they were proud to start at the back row because they'd earned it.
Yeah.
Every time you won a race, you went back 10 yards or 10 metres, you know. And you got paid a bit extra money too. But it was the prestige of coming from the back of the field.
Yeah.
And of course, we saw at Claremont so many times, you know, say 20 speed cars, and you had the John Fentons and the Charlie West flying around the outside, you know, picking up half the field a lap or two, you know, which is incredible stuff to watch.
Yeah.
Unfortunately, you know, progress, these days, a lot of times it becomes a bit follow the leader because the top guys are off the front. It's the way it is with motorsport anywhere around the world, I guess, but a very unique era for quite a few decades, you know, in Claremont and other tracks around Australia, of course, where even the motorbikes, I mean, bikes have four bikes in a race, or sidecars in a race. Claremont had 6 in a scratch race, 8 in a handicap.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah, when you get the 8 sidecars.
And I mean, you had 8 motorbikes, solos or sidecars.
Yeah.
The Chum Taylor was about 150 metres behind.
He was in the next suburb.
Virtually, yeah. He had 3 laps to pass 7 other bikes.
Yeah.
And by God, he did it quite often too.
And a lot of people were fixated for those 3 laps of like, he's picked another one off. He's picked another one off.
You're watching the guy coming through the field,
And I think you mentioned before about what it was that made Claremont special. I think the size of the track too, like you go anywhere and watch motorcycle racing and they're usually on tiny tracks and it's good because they're together. But you get, you know, sidecars and solos on Claremont, full noise, like open it up and just go, and then through the corners full. It was just awesome, wasn't it?
Claremont was probably too big for bikes. If you come down to it, you know. And I love the bikes there.
Yeah, scary.
But then I remember one time the English team were here and they actually raced on a Saturday afternoon at Bibra Lake. And that's the first time I'd seen solos on a small track. And I was blown away because, I mean, they're elbow to elbow, side by side, you know. A different spectacle, if you like, to the Claremont, because Claremont had the big open spaces. And of course, they got amazing speeds from the bikes as well as the cars at Claremont, you know.
Yeah.
And you could walk around the outside, the people that never went there, you could walk around the outside and it would be a different bit of, you know, something to see. So you'd be on the grass in one bit, or you could go to the grandstands on the main straight. You know, you could go to Fowl House. It's always different places to sit. I think motorplexes are starting to do that now with that Highline deck. Is magnificent. So if you ever get a chance to go up to the Highline deck, go up there because it's worth the extra few bucks you've got to pay. But those kind of things made it unique as well because
you could go
around.
anywhere in Claremont, didn't you? Or you paid a couple of dollars to go in the grandstand. Otherwise, you could go anywhere, go into the pit. Well, you couldn't go into the pit, sorry, in those days. You had to sit outside the pit and look for the wire fence, but anywhere on the track you go, as the lady said before, people love to sit in Fowl House was their spot, or Pitchbend was their spot, or the main straight, or turn 1, or whatever.
What's sort of got to wrap it up because we're going to get kicked out of here at 4 o'clock, but I don't know. But what's some of the things, Ken? We don't want to sort of talk negative stuff. So, what's some of the really cool stuff that you remember over the years that you're like, wow, so good to see it? Like whether it be a test team or a USA team or just a race win by, say, Mike Figlamini or whatever. What's some of the things that you remember?
Well, there's a lot. It's a lot. One thing I think, you know, I talk about the good old days, and that's my age, I guess. But one thing I like, we don't have these days. I mean, let's face it, the program, whether it's the bikes or the cars, is pretty well. For the cars, time trial, heats, feature race. Cars is heats in the main event, A final or whatever for the bikes. we had that, of course. We didn't have the time trials in the early days, but we had the heat race and you had the feature race. But we had match races, and they were a lot of fun. That was a great gimmick. You'd have in the programming, Billy Bloggs has bet 20 quid that he's going to beat so and so, and it would be all put up. But it got the crowd there.
Yep.
And I mean, the match race was obviously 2 cars or 2 bikes to race over 3 laps or 2 laps sometimes, and the crowd would be cheering all the way through it, of course, and often it was the best 2 out of 3.
Mm.
And it's amazing how many times whoever won the first one just missed out in the second one. They just got beaten on the line, So there was the decider, It was great promotion. It was good stuff. The crowd loved it,
Yeah.
The speed cars had the 1 lap dashes, which was 3 cars side by side. They raced for a lap, and then when they finished, car number 1 went to number 2, 2 went to 3, and they changed over.
Yep.
Another lap. Then they changed over again. So they had 3 goes at it on each 1, 2 and 3, added the points up. And it's just a bit of a gimmick,
Yeah.
But it was something different to break up the program.
Yep.
And I mean, before the first speed car race, the drivers came. They were pushed out with the pit crews to the main straight. Helmets off. They didn't start the motors, and some of the crowd would come down. Usually a lady who would judge the best presented car, and go and look at all the cars and pick out the best one and give it.
Yeah.
That was something different. Something the crowd got involved, and something that's gone by the board, and we can't do it nowadays. But often they would start the cars up, and speed cars, for example, and drive them round, just tonk around, go back in the pits without a helmet on. You can't do it
People
these
could see
days.
the driver.
But you see the driver. I mean, even let's face it, the cars these days, they're so enclosed. In the old days, you could see the driver at work, in the car, and he's flicking the tear-offs off, when they come, they can put their hand up and wave. But nowadays, the restraints, they can't move. Obviously safety plays the precedent because it's very important. But those sort of things, that part of the sport's gone. Unfortunately, it will never come back. But that's the way it was back in those days. Like for example, I remember just a little incident. Most of the guys wore white overalls or whatever, And my brother Don one day rocked up in a pair of red ones, and they called him all sorts of names. You're one. He copped it because he wore a pair of red overalls, and everyone wore white.
Yeah.
Nowadays, you have racing uniforms, every colour under the sun. And bikes, leathers, every colour under the sun. With their names of their sponsor, whatever.
Yeah.
Helmets, etc. But I look at it. We had a few incidents, of course, at the track where tempers got frayed, and when the guy came around, the guy got out of his car and he waved, or even threw his helmet. It was all part of it. It was all, that wasn't staged. That was done because the guy was pretty pissed off. But it was part of the deal that the emotions ran high sometimes.
And the commentators were onto it too.
Oh,
they pointed those things out, made sure that if you weren't looking, you were going to be looking.
Let's face it, Con had nicknames for everybody. We had Big Bad Bert, and you had Super Ding Tony Matter, and all this sort of Abe the Flying 4B2 Schneider, and all this, which you can't do these days. It's not politically correct, but that was part of the sport. It was great. Everyone knew Chum the Master Taylor and this sort of stuff. Alf, Mr. Sprint Car Barbagallo.
Yeah.
They were household names.
I'm trying to do that with a few.
I can remember actually Stan Starcevich doing radio commercials. TV commercials for used cars. Which you don't think that would happen. But,
Well, Pedro, we've got to wrap it up. But anything else you want to ask Kenny before we have to leave this magnificent place?
Yep. Just thank Ken for putting the time up and spending a couple of hours with us. It's been fantastic.
Look, it's a pleasure. It's great to talk Speedway and reminisce, and they were great days. They'll not come back. Well, you can read about them in the books, of course, but got to get a plug in.
We do our best. We do our best.
Thanks for having me. I appreciate it.
No, we appreciate it, Kenny. Thanks very much.
Not a problem.
Thanks,
What
Brandon.
you've done is invaluable to the sport,
and
maybe more people will realise that down the track, because
Thank you.
it's not probably something that people think about as it's happening.
No.
In the future. So, I appreciate you coming on the show. That's it for us for this episode of Slightly Sideways. We thank Ken Brown for joining me and Pedro, and we'll come back with the next episode real shortly.